questions on oh gosh, what is that platform online where you ask questions?
Quora?
Quora, there we go. I don't know why I couldn't think of that today. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm finally here. No, I was on Quora. I think this was a couple of years ago, and somebody asked the question, why were the Vikings more violent than everybody else?
Yeah.
And I went in there and gave them this nice long answer of they weren't. In fact, they may have been less violent because it was an age of violence. Everybody was killing everybody. Everybody was trying to, I mean, we just, they show up on the world stage pretty much right towards the end of multiples of centuries of Germanic tribes conquering everything else. Right. So it's just one more wave,
Yeah, as an archaeologist and someone who specializes in the study of burials, and I've looked at, thousands of burials from different parts of Europe. And my question, if this was such a violent time, well, where is the violence in the burial record? It's not really there, actually, because the majority of the skeletal remains that we find, they don't have any traces of trauma inflicted by sharp bladed weapons. Where are all the bodies from all these invasions and from all these raids and so on? Where are they? They're not there. Or they are occasionally found. Yeah, you have these mass graves, Repton and so on, but these are just little points on the map. But en masse, where is that? It's just not there.
I think that's funny. Getting back kind of full circle then to the Burqa grave, because that's obviously one of the things that they've said about that, right? Well, if she's this warrior, why doesn't she have any evidence of?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's many ways you can die in battle, and that a deadly wound does not have to affect bone. It can be a flesh wound, and you can just bleed out, or they can strangle you or something.
Yeah.
But still, for a theoretically a violent time that we think the Viking Age was, there's really not so much evidence of violence.
Right.
I would expect there to be much more, but there isn't really.
Yeah, actually, that's kind
there's
of
evidence of a martial culture. Yeah, they're producing weapons. Yeah, they're producing weapons. If you look at the Slavic worlds, there are literally thousands of strongholds. So that tells us something, that it's a martial society, that it's organized, that you have to have people to build these things for you. Probably they're not doing it willingly. They are probably doing slave work. But where is real, in your face evidence of violence?
I think it gets to so many of the assumptions, that we were talking about earlier too, and mentioning that, having referred my students to that section of your book about women and weapons, and just how do you interpret these things that you find as well. And David Zori. Yeah, so he's a friend of mine, and we were having this conversation about actually a grave that was found here in Iceland, where I am and where he worked for many years. And the assumptions that kind of get repeated, and I noticed you mentioned that even in your historiographical essay about scholars, sort of like, oh, this is the party line, and we kind of repeat it. And CJ and I have talked about this with other guests as well. And the grave gets found, and it's got a fully intact skeleton and then two other bodies with it who have been decapitated. And so then it's kind of like, okay, it's the usual trope. Then what we say there is those were slaves who were killed to go, with this other person into the afterlife. And I was joking with David, because he was kind of, talking about it like that. And I said, we have this thing in the United States called a good old fashioned murder-suicide. It's like, I was like, we know where the grave is, David and I. It's in this kind of far-flung, really isolated place in Iceland, which is isolated enough as it is. And I'm like, what if you just got tired of that existence, or, a famine was happening and you're like, we're just not going to make it or something, right? And so then whoever the leader of that household was just decided, I'm just going to be humane and take you out by cutting off your head. And here I'm kind of joking, like this would be funny, but do you know what I mean? It's just like, it just gets so much to this idea of interpretation and how we kind of jump to some of these conclusions. But like you said, where is the evidence of the violence, or necessarily that these were people who were enslaved, you know, that got killed this way to go to the afterlife? I don't know.
I would push back a little bit and say, I think anytime there's a martial culture, there's a presumption of violence, you know, to start. I'd say with the Franks, at least, there was a lot of violence, and they bragged about it. They wrote about their battles, and like there's one battle in 841 is a battle of succession, the Battle of Fontenoy and Puisaye, where so some historians think a third of the entire landowning gentry was killed in that battle, right? So there was a lot of violence, at least in Western Europe, and then if you go to England, every couple of years there's another mass grave that's uncovered. I think there's one at Weymouth, there's one at Repton. So we're finding more and more of these things. So but to your point, you've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of graves, and I just pointed out two, right? So proportionally, it's not
to say that there was no violence, but perhaps we just, in thinking about the Vikings and the Viking Age, we again, as I say, we kind of blow it out of proportion.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we know just to draw a parallel with other parts of history, if we go back to the ancient Greeks, and they had their, the hoplites, and the phalanx formation, etc. We don't know that much about those things, but we do know that in some of the sources that relate to us how these things worked, they would march up to each other with their spears and shields, and then it was less of a battle of blades and more of a battle of wits, where they would just kind of smash into each other, and then one side, like one guy might die, and then everybody else would panic and run, right? And then they would drop their shields and their helmets and everything, and that's why the word trophy comes from the Greek word for helmet, because that's what they put on the field. And, hey, we won, but not very many people had to die, right? And so I think today we are so desensitized to certain types of violence, particularly, I mean, look at the 20th century, where we just massacred everybody. I mean, that was just atrocious. And so that's our recent, our recent experience of violence. But if you go back 1,000 years, very different, right? I mean, it's, first of all, they didn't have the tools to kill people en masse, but at the same time, it's, I definitely see this argument of maybe it wasn't such a violent time. It's just we're hyper focused on the violent things, right?